Were you with them when they got any of the big game?
Yeah, I've been in camps where they've shot giraffe before, and kudu, yeah, kudu and zebra. So yeah, absolutely.
And then what is it like when that happens? Because I only saw the small game. I would
Hmm.
imagine they quarter it, they bring it back to camp, and they eat it for days and days and days. And there's a big celebration. That was kind of what they talked about. That when they got the big game, everybody would sing
Yeah,
and dance.
yeah. I don't know. I think the singing and dancing doesn't happen necessarily. They were psyched to have it, and so I think the biggest thing in terms of just weight that I've ever seen them bring back to camp is a full grown zebra, which are those things are huge. And so, yeah, there was like meat hanging from trees for days after that. So they don't smoke it. They cut it into strips. They eat the organ meat right away. That goes pretty quickly. And then the meat, they cut up into strips and they hang from the trees around their homes, their houses, and that dries that out because it's a very dry, hot climate there. And then they just sort of throw a chunk on the fire and eat it. But I will say that there's still, the women still go out gathering. Guys will still go out and even though they just got the zebra, they'll still hunt the next day. And kind of things don't change in terms of their foraging efforts very much. I haven't noticed. We actually have an analysis kind of working on that, but in process right now. It doesn't look like they change very much, but they definitely do enjoy having the meat in the trees for a few days.
And when I was with them, they ate the organs first as well. We were lucky enough, and I felt very privileged to be able to share a little bit of baboon kidney and heart and liver, and then the next day some baboon brain with them.
Hmm.
And so you mentioned the apim meats in your book, and that was something that we observed there as well. I did not know that testicles were apim as well, but certainly the organs appear to be apim meats or like super special meats that are really reserved for elder senior men in the tribe, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's yeah, a peme meats is how they pronounce it usually, but there are foods that parts of the animal, and it has to be, but so not all animals have a peme meat. So like if you shot a squirrel, I don't think there's a peme meat on a squirrel. It has to be like a certain size of animal base, basically. And that's right. Men get sort of first dibs on some of the special meat, and women aren't supposed to eat them. And there's a whole cultural thing about why that is true. And it's a lot like our own stories, especially like traditionally, like you can't eat. I grew up in a Catholic household. You couldn't eat meat on Friday. Why is that? Well, I mean, there's a whole history in religion. There's a whole doctrine to that. Um, and so, kind of the same thing. Culturally, that's how it would go down.
Now, maybe I know that you were there for a long amount of time, but I'm just curious, what kind of other things did you observe them eating? And let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's hunting and gathering, right? So the men are out hunting most days, and when they are, we'll talk about the men first. Men go out and hunt big game, or any game really, and when they kind of get tired of it or decide they'd have better luck doing other things, sometimes they'll climb trees and get honey. They always carry an axe with them, a small sort of hatchet. They call them axes, but they're kind of hatchet sized, and they'll climb up to these big baobab trees and chop into the limbs of the trees to get out honey. So they eat a lot of honey, and the women are getting plant foods, and so usually that's it could be tubers or it could be berries or it could be they help process baobab foods. Men often collect the baobab pods. Women will too, but and the women process them. So yeah, it's a whole mix of things. I mean, I think the full species list, plants and animals for the Hods is it's dozens and dozens of species long.
I got to see them. I got to go on a couple of honey foraging expeditions with them, and we found a couple of the small straws that go into the baobab tree. We did not use the help of a honey guide bird, but I want to have
Uh-huh.
you tell us about that.
Yeah,
But we
yeah.
saw these little straws in the tree, and then I got to hack into the tree with them. They called it kanoa, I think, is the honey from the
Mm,
stingless bees. And
yep.
then, just as you described in the book, one of the more senior members of the tribe quickly made a bunch of stakes out of tree limbs and pounded them into the baobab and was suddenly up in the tree looking for more honey. It was really interesting.
Yeah.
One of the statistics that you point out in your book, which I found quite striking but not necessarily surprising, was that at times they get 15+% of their energy from honey and
Yeah.
sugars, things like that. So it's certainly not a low carb, and I did not observe them to be a low carb culture at all.
Yeah. Right.
They loved honey, But I love that in the book you described actually being with them. I wish I'd been there when they used the honey guide. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, I've only seen it maybe just the one time, maybe twice. They're always listening for them. So it was really fun. We were walking with this guy Mossad and his wife. They don't but when men hunt by themselves, but if they're going to go out and they know they're going to get honey that day, sometimes wife will come with them or a buddy will come with them. But so they're going out to just get honey that day mostly, and yeah, we're just walking along, man. And Mossad, he's like, they whistle, which is really cool. So they have these really kind of clear whistles, and each guy has his own signature whistle. There's a whole study there, I guess, about how they develop their own whistles. But they're always whistling and kind of, trying to get the honey guide to answer back. And there's this species of bird called a honey guide that will, if it sees people and it knows where there's a beehive, will whistle back, call back, and then it will sort of come around and flutter around, and it will sort of lead you to a beehive, to a tree where there's a hive up in the tree. And it was completely amazing because you're just walking and this guy's whistling. I didn't really understand why he was whistling. It was my first season there with the Hadza, and I thought he was just like just whistling. And it turns out he was calling about the honey guide. And so when he saw him, boom, just turns like 90 degrees and shoots towards. It was just so cool to see. And sure enough, there's a big old hive of honey up there. Yeah, it's really neat.
I think that we asked them what happens, or there's some lore around this, kind of like there's lore around the Epeme meat.
Yeah.
And we said, what if you don't save any honey for the honey guide bird? Did you ever ask them that?
Yeah, so my buddy and my colleague Brian Wood has actually done a whole study on this. And if you ask them what you do, so they always bury the comb and they don't want to share any with it, with the honey guide. So they kind of, it's interesting, because you'd think that they want to give back. And that's one thing you learn when you work with the Hadza is that, the whole noble, savage mythology that we tell our stories. We tell ourselves about, oh, they must have hearts for these animals, No, it's totally transactional in a way. And when they get the honey out of the hive, they'll take everything they can get. And then if there's anything extra or left, they bury it or cover it up or burn it because they don't want the honey guide to get any. And if you ask them why they do that, of course, the honey guide does get some. So if you're listening at home, don't worry. The honey guide will get plenty anyway, just to scraps around. But if you ask them why they bury it and why they don't want the honey guide to get any, they'll tell you, oh, well, if he gets full, he won't come back and tell me where the next hive is. So there's a whole lore, like you say, about what they do and why they do it.
It's so interesting the way they interact with their environment.